Whether you're a homeschooler like me, or whether you just have a child that you want to help in their reading journey, or if you want to get on that bandwagon of teaching to read early, then this video is going to help you teach your child how to read in the 4 stages, and it's going to give you a simple game plan in teaching your child to read. Hello, my name is Sinead. I am mum to 5, almost 6 children, and I am a 2nd generation homeschooler. And today's video, I wanted to really take you through in depth how to teach a child to read. I am currently teaching my 3 boys to read, so I have a fledgling reader, I have a beginner reader, and I have a kindergartner. I don't have 15 years of experience behind me, and I'm sure that in another 5 years I might watch this video and go, I have learned a whole lot since then, but that's always going to happen. So far, I've been teaching to read for 3 years. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've learnt a lot of things about teaching to read. So in this video, I'm going to give you the 4 stages of teaching your child how to read. I'm also going to give you some 4 pretty crucial steps to success when it comes to teaching how to read. And I'm going to share with you some of my mistakes so that maybe you can avoid those and just learn from me. Okay, so before we get into the 4 stages of learning to read and of teaching to read, we get into any of that, I want to introduce the idea of your child's age and considering that in your journey. A lot of us are pretty keen to have our children read early. It's such a big milestone, and you know, it can give us as homeschoolers and as parents a lot of pride to have our children reading early, and it can really weigh on our conscience and make us have a lot of self-doubt if our child is not reading early or on time. And so for the first section of this video, that's what I want to talk about. And this is definitely a practice. It is not something that comes easy, and it is something that you will have good days on and bad days on when it comes to relaxing into your child's ability on their timeline when it comes to teaching them how to read. I have a kindergarten blog post which actually goes into a bit more depth on just how to introduce formal learning to young children and the signs that they are ready. So I will link that below and you can read that post. But I want to talk about that reading is an extremely difficult skill when you really break it down to the many things that have to be memorized and decoded and learnt in language and in written word and in spoken word, and the English rules and the many crazy exceptions that our English language has. When you're a teacher or a mother and you're realizing that you have to break this down and you have to give all this information to your children, you begin to realize the true task ahead. And I think that many children are placed on this learning journey far too early. I think you need to embrace the idea of just letting your child relax into their ability to learn this skill. I think that even as late as 8 or 9, you can be introducing learning to read. There are many other things that you can teach in the meantime. I'm not saying that you do nothing, but it really is up to the individual child, and it is something that I have learned. It is a mistake that I have made, and it is something that I really stand by now because I really believe in it, and I've seen the outcomes of what actually happens when you wait, and they are great outcomes. So if you're about to begin teaching your child to read and they're 4 or 5 years old, you can definitely introduce them to stage 1, which we will talk about. But if they are not ready for the 2nd and 3rd stage, then I would suggest holding them back, continuing to do a lot of read alouds with them, continuing to doing other schooling that they enjoy, and continuing to teach them life skills so they can develop their thinking capacity, and then introducing reading maybe in a year when they're 7 and trying that instead. That's definitely an approach that I think that if you want to truly succeed and have a fairly frustration-free learning to read journey, then consider their starting age and don't pressure yourself to start a child because the rest of society is starting their children. Just take it easy. If you need to, it's definitely a mindset that takes some getting used to, but it can be done. So now I want to take you through the 4 stages of learning to read. Now, the starting stage. This is potentially from the age of 1 to 5, and it is read alouds. You want to read aloud to your child every day. It is crucial. It is something that I did not do enough of. This is going to highlight my first mistake as a parent trying to teach their kids how to read. I did not read to my eldest children enough. I read a lot more now to my younger children because I have made it a daily priority. But with my eldest children, when I was still new to the whole concept and I was already overwhelmed in so many other things, I didn't maintain consistency when it came to just pulling out a book and reading aloud to my boys. Now, it definitely was a little bit of them and a little bit of me because they were never keen to listen, although that was probably because I was never teaching them to listen. I think it is a skill that is acquired from a young age. So if you have young children in the home, I suggest that a stage one, and you can think of it whether they're going to school or whether they're going to be homeschooled, stage one of teaching to read is read alouds. Now you're going to continue this read aloud process until they're 5 and 6 and 7. And even way older, as long as they want to listen to you read, you can read aloud to your children. But this is definitely part of stage one, and you can begin very early, and it is very important. I have a book list of stage one readers that you can read for language and vocabulary in my learning and teaching how to read post, which I will link down below. Read alouds potentially, they increase your child's vocabulary, they increase their ability to listen and to focus, which was something that my children struggled with because I wasn't maintaining that consistency in their daily lives with reading to them. It teaches them. So the next thing you can introduce in stage one of teaching to read is to teach the sounds of a letter. All right, so this is the beginning stages of phonetics. So you want to teach the sounds of the letter, and for a young child you don't even actually have to focus on teaching the names of the letter. So you don't have to teach A, B, C, through A to Z. You can instead focus your time on teaching A, B, K, D, E, F, and so on from A to Z. So how I do, what is a very effective way, is to use flashcards. If you get a good set of flashcards, I have the ones that I use linked down below. If you use a good set of flashcards, the child can create a sort of letter to a picture association. So A is for apple, B is for bear, and so on. And even when your children is in the like right into the beginner stage of learning to read, like reading words and small sentences, they will often still, if they have a stumble with a letter, they will often still refer to that picture that they associated the sound of the letter with. So for lion or per for pig, they will associate that letter, that sound, with the image, and it always helps them to recall. So the first stage of teaching your children to read, and what you want to do, is to introduce them flashcards with some good pictures. Now I want to note that some flashcards can have a terrible picture association because the image is either not clear, so the child is always guessing what it is, or because the word itself isn't clear. Like for me, X for saxophone doesn't work because in all of the other letters, it's like A for apple, B for bear, P for pig, Q for queen, and then X for saxophone. So you want to watch your flashcards, or if you can, have a look through them before you get them. I actually have some free printable flashcards that you can use in my Learning to Read bundle, which you can download and print off yourself, which I think have fairly good images to associate with the letter sound. Stage one, if you want, can be introduced at a very young age, because it's, especially with the flashcard system that I use, they just have fun. If your child wants to do school and they want to feel included, then you can just give them that activity. And actually it can be an activity that they do even if it's not school time or anything like that. The flashcards that I use, they have the child make a train using little symbols in the corner of the cards. So that also helps the child learn the sequence of A, B, C, and D from A to Z in a fun way. And the next thing that we do in stage one is simply sing the alphabet and a lot of read alouds. That is stage one. Stage one is mastered when the child can just easily and confidently recall each letter sound. When you say A, when you point to A, because they may not know the name, and that is fine. If you point to A, they can go A is for apple, K is for cat, D is for dog, and they just know it all by heart. And that is going to get you right onto the second stage of learning to read. All right, so the second stage of learning to read is going to build on the first stage, obviously, and that is to introduce simple words. Now, because your child has a good grasp on what the sound that letter makes, when they see C, hopefully they shouldn't be seeing C, they should be seeing K. So you have drilled in that C is K for cat. That's why it's not necessarily helpful that you are teaching your children the names of the alphabet as a primary source of information, because that doesn't really help them read. We're not going to go D-O-G, we're going to go D-O-G. So you want to be able to, so you can totally skip the names of the letters if you want. I just sing the alphabet and that just reinforces that anyway. But you want to focus on the sounds of the letters. I want to quickly note here too, a mistake that I have seen a lot here on YouTube is that when parents or teachers are teaching the children the name of the letter, they say ba instead of b. So it's b, like if you're going to go big, b-i-g, not ba-i-g. So make sure that you're not doing an e or an a. So it's not ka, it's k. So just the sound in the back of your throat. It's not le, it's l. Make sure that you're doing that properly and that your child is saying it properly, because if they adapt an a or an e or even an I onto the end of each of the sounds, they're going to read that way, and you'll have to unlearn that whole process in stage 2. So that's something to note. So stage 2 is introducing simple words now. So you're going to have k, a, t. And the child is going to be able to read this almost immediately because they recognize the letters and their sounds. And the child is going to be able to recognize this almost immediately. I find if you have really mastered stage 1, then this first section of stage 2 gives the child a huge boost in confidence, because when you introduce those small words to your child, they realize that they can read, and confidence is crucial when it comes to teaching your child to read. They must maintain good high confidence levels, because as they are continuing the learning journey, the reading is going to get more and more complex. It's going to mean they have to try harder and harder for longer and longer, and a child with good confidence in their ability is going to try hard most of the time. That is going to take away a lot of frustration in your journey. So this stage is going to give your child a lot of confidence. Now, if you get to this stage, if you introduce this section of stage 2 and you've introduced small words and the child is suddenly stumbling, they're not recalling the sounds of the letters, they're very frustrated and they're not able to do it, then stop and go back to learning the sounds of the letters, and perhaps introduce maybe some new or better images, or introduce just the letters themselves and really drill home the sound that letter makes, and just continue on that, and then come back to stage 2 and introduce your small words. The second section of stage 2, which you can introduce, is blends. Now, blends aren't necessarily words, they're just blends. So they're usually 2 consonants and a vowel. So it could be B-L-A, blah, C-L-A, cla, D-L-A, dla. So they're not words, but they're a way of your child really having to move their mouth around the sound, having to sound out the sound, and then having to work hard on and placing those 3 sounds into one fluent sound. Blends are very important for your child's ability to really hone sounding out separate letters and putting them together into one. And if you focus on these, I usually focus on like 5 to 10 at a time. Have your child read them out loud, and that will help you really hone their skills when it comes to reading real words. If you want to use the same curriculum that I do, you will find the simple words that I teach in stage 2 in the McGuffey's primer, and you will also find the blends that I teach in stage 2 in the McGuffey eclectic speller. All right, so the first couple of pages of the speller is just all of these blends, and you can work through them. So if not, you are able to create these blends yourself, because you only need 2 consonants and a vowel, and you can pretty much create anything that you like. And you can also create all the simple words yourself, because it's just cat, hat, rat, sat, you know, hit and sit and all those ones, and hen and pen and pot. and so on, and you can create all of those yourself if you want to, because it's simply taking the short sounds that you have learnt in your alphabet and blending them together into whatever word you can create. Now, to master stage 2, you want your child to be able to read with ease any word that you give with just one syllable, so hat and rat and cat. You want them to be able to read with ease blends that you give them. They shouldn't be stumbling, they shouldn't be frustrated, they should be able to just read along the page and be able to say each blend well. All right, they shouldn't be stumbling. Another way that you can really create and hone this skill and master the stage 2 of reading is to use oral dictation. Now, from stage 2 to stage 4, I use oral dictation to master all the stages. Oral dictation is simply, once they get to a stage where they're fairly confident, you can start to say to them, okay, get your book out and your pencil. I want you to write hat. I want you to write cat, and so on. And this just helps them to be able to, without an image or without seeing the letters in front of them, to be able to think through the sounds and how to spell those. Once they can do that well with no mistakes, a list of words, then you can move on to the 3rd stage of learning to read. For stage 3, another thing which I introduce, which I use in my reading curriculum, is the Phonics Made Plain flashcards. I have these linked below. You can buy them from Amazon, as well as the McGuffey reader set that I use. These are really helpful because if you read my Teaching to Read post, you will know that there are 3 areas of phonetics, which are phonemes, graphemes, and they are digraphs. So these 3 are what make up the English language and all the weird quirky sounds that we have with our letter blends. A phoneme is the phonetic sound of the letter. It is a, b, k, d, e, and so on. But for some letters, for example for C, there's hard C, which is cat, and there's soft C, which is S for city. Like for E, there is E for me, and there's E for egg. So there are a select, I think it's like 13 or 14 letters in the alphabet which have more than one sound. And so in stage 3, you are going to begin to introduce teaching the 2nd and even the 3rd set for some letters of their sounds. For example, A makes 3 sounds. It makes A, and O. So using the Phonics Made Plain flashcards, you will have access to teaching every sound that that letter makes. And once you have mastered a few of these sounds, doesn't have to be all of them, you can then move on to teaching small sentences. So now in stage 3, you're going to introduce the 2nd and 3rd set of these phonetic sounds that the alphabet makes. You're also going to introduce reading sentences. Now, this is all in the primer of the McGuffey series. So you simply turn a few pages and you're going to be introduced to reading simple sentences. Now, these simple sentences don't necessarily make sense at first. They're there to introduce the different sounds that these letters can make. For example, as in AS. So we have the S making the Z sound. And so you can use that, pull out the S flashcard for that week, and you have your child master that S can make 2 sounds, S and Z. So that's how I do it. I just work through the primer with my beginner reader. So stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, I would call beginner readers. This is when the pace is still slow and the learning and the amount of new information is on an overload. So it takes you quite a while to work through basic concepts to mastery. And so this stage can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months to 2 years. And you have to be just okay with that. It just depends on the child, and the end result is going to be a child who can read well. The 3rd thing that you can introduce into your reading is now digraphs. And I have no idea if I'm saying that right, so just bear with me if it's completely off. What these are the sounds that we say. For example, E-A-R makes the sound ear. E-R makes I-R makes U-R makes and all the many sounds in the English language. Again, I use the Phonics Made Plain flashcards for this because they're just so handy. On the back they have like a little teacher's guide, so I know exactly which words to give him as examples. It's not hard, and you simply continue to make your way through the primer and introducing these new sounds in flashcard form. You can stay on the same page of reading for that story until the spelling words are mastered through oral dictation. Remember, I said that I use oral dictation to master each and every step, and that includes each and every reading lesson in the primer and the level 1 reader in the McGuffey series. And you can also just be mastering those flashcards. At the same time, you will only ever have to introduce 1 or 2 at a time, so it's never overwhelming for you or for your student. Now, once you're through this process, which will take you through the primer and the level 1 reader, you simply, once you're into stage 3, you're simply going to follow the process, which is continue to introduce new sounds. By the time you finish the primer, you should have mastered the different sounds that a letter can make, so the phonemes of a letter, the phonetic sounds. By the time you make it through to the level 1 reader, or by the time you're reading readers like from the Osborne series or from the Ladybird book series in the level 1 readers, you should be just introducing new sound blends like ear and ch and th and k as you make your way through. The lessons should be fairly easy. They should be very repetitive. You should be using oral dictation to dictate sentences and spelling words before moving on to a new lesson. And you will just continue this for as long as it takes to work through until you have a reader who is now a fledgling reader. So I have my oldest son who is a fledgling slash confident fledgling. He is able to read almost on his own. He does get a lot of words wrong because there are just so many words that he's constantly introduced to, but that's the point. He reads on his own. For example, he reads his own math problem, and I have him reading for 20 minutes a day on a book that challenges him, so above his level, and that slowly grows his vocabulary and his ability to sound out, his ability to place new sounds and into new words, to learn exceptions to the sounds. And it's just that journey from there on out. So this is stage 4. Stage 4 reading is just continuing the journey. You can always go back. You should be listening to your reader. You should be paying attention to how they're reading. You should be paying attention to how they're reading their grammar. Are they being sure to focus on question marks and exclamation marks, and do they know what the quotations are, and full stops and commas and semicolons and all those kinds of things. I have flashcards for these in my Teaching to Read post, which you can download and introduce to your children in stage 3. To start introducing them to simple grammar. But of course, the more and more they read, the more and more intricate the grammar is going to be. So do pay attention to those things. Stage 4 is really fine-tuning your reader. It's encouraging them to read as much as they're capable of, and it's encouraging them to read book titles that are challenging to them, and it's encouraging them to just keep trying, because the journey is definitely not over now. But now the journey is less about shoving flashcards in their face and all that. It's now just about immersing them in language and just being there to keep on correcting, and to also monitor if they do need some help somewhere, if you have missed something along the road, which is definitely going to happen. And that's stage 4. So I would say that my fledgling reader is just beginning stage 4 reading, where it's less flashcards and all those things, and daily repetitiveness, and it's more reading and more reading and more reading and fine-tuning, and me just listening to him read, and yeah, taking the time to step back and teach him information that he may have forgotten. So that's the 4 stages of Teaching to Read. And I've mentioned a couple of times, I have a blog post called Teaching to Read, which I will link down below. In that, I actually have a downloadable guide that you can print off and use, which outlines each stage from stage 1 to stage 4, to recall and to plan a little bit on what you're going to teach your child to read. Book list from read alouds to confident readers. I have a step-by-step guide on how to teach your child to read. I have the links to all the curriculum that I use, and I have links to other curriculum if you don't want to use the one that I use, but you want to follow the same process, which is the basic process of teaching to read. I have other curriculums that you can try and find, that you can try on your own, and maybe that will fit you better than the one that I use. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the mistakes that I have made in my Teaching to Read journey. My first just huge mistake when I was teaching my oldest son to read was I was not consistent. I thought I was at the time, and I wanted to be fun and varying, and this was in my first year of homeschooling where I didn't really know what I wanted and what would suit me. I didn't really know what kind of homeschooler I was. I didn't know what kind of learner my children were. And I was juggling new babies and all that kind of stuff at the time, and I was not consistent. Now, being consistent does not have to be daunting. It's actually quite easy. It's just about maintaining that importance behind your reading schedule, I suppose. And to be consistent, I have learnt that not only is it more consistent to do really short lessons, but it's actually a lot more effective when it comes to teaching to read. So you only need to teach for like 10 to 15 minutes a day. A reading lesson does not need to be for half an hour to 45 minutes. To be repeating yourself in the lesson. Just repeat that lesson over and over again each day until it's mastered. So for me, consistency means showing up for 10 minutes, probably 5 days, at least 5 days a week, and that is going to get me way better results than if I showed up 3 times a week for 40 minutes. Not only for me, but also for my child. When you're teaching to read, it's a hard thing for a child to learn. There's a lot of information there, and hopefully as the teacher we're doing a good job to break up that information as best we can into tiny chunks, which definitely helps, but it's still a lot to be mastered. And because it's quite repetitive, if you're doing it for too long, it is going to get really boring, and for a child they're going to turn off. They're not going to retain that information. So I find that 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week is enough for them to be effective, for them to retain it, for them, it's just long enough for them to, you know, enjoy it and to be able to feel confident in their ability and that they're actually moving along. It's also quick enough that I can maintain really true consistency. I can teach for 10 minutes, and I know I can teach for 10 minutes no matter what time of day it is, day or night. I can do it. And so it keeps me being super consistent, which was a huge mistake that I made in my first year. I was not consistent, and I pretty much cost us that first year. I think that if I had have been more consistent and realized the importance of effective learning and consistent learning, I would have done a lot better in that first year. But it's a lesson learned now, so I'm wiser for it. Another thing which I have realized is a huge booster in reading is confidence. Some children have more confidence than others naturally, and I find that some children have a lot more frustration than others naturally. So for example, my second son, he gets frustrated really easily, like so easily. And so when he's very frustrated, he immediately loses confidence, and then he stops trying, and it's just this snowball effect. So I have found that by really, you know, lots of praise, really dissecting those concepts into tiny little chunks, so that he can he can feel good about himself. Because if he feels good about himself, I will get 100% trying from him. If he begins to feel frustrated and like he can't do it, which he will sometimes, because yes, I am going to introduce some new knowledge there, you know, like, so there's going to be, all right, now let's try this is something new. But I have learned that through boosting his confidence level, I have been able to get a lot more out of him. Now, how I boosted his confidence levels with reading was I knew already from his personality that introducing the teaching to read, the learning to read journey when he was 5 was going to be an absolute no. I introduced writing to him and mathematics, and he does, you know, garden work, and he's learnt to cook. He's a really keen cook. But teaching to read, I knew that was just, don't even go there. So he is turning 9 tomorrow, and he's only just in the beginning process of stage 2. So he's finished stage 1. He's now learning simple sentences, blends, and dictation. So he's 9. So he'll be probably good 10 before he's a fledgling reader. And I'm fine with that because he feels good about the journey, and that's just as important as the journey itself. If you've got just constant frustration and anger and the feeling of inability in both you and your child, it's a long journey to teaching how to read. So that is something you can avoid if you're willing and able to relax into allowing your children to relax into their learning ability and routine. Another thing that I went wrong with my first year was I wasn't repetitive enough. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the consistency, but you can still be consistent and not be repetitive. So I wanted to note the repetitive side. You do have to be boring when it comes to teaching reading. I don't think that there is a really super duper fun way to teach reading when it really comes down to it. You can introduce some things in a fun way, but when it really comes to true mastery of a concept to help them move on in their reading journey and help them to be able to retain that information, you know, for a long time, it's going to take some repetitiveness, and that's a little bit boring. This is another reason why I think a 10 to 15 minute lesson is more effective in a young child, because it is boring, it is repetitive. You have to open the same page sometimes and read the same sentences, you know, for 2 weeks or maybe even longer, maybe a month. Being in that mindset where, you know, there are so many other fun things that you can do in your homeschooling, but the teaching to read is not necessarily going to be fun all the time. It has to be repetitive and it has to be consistent, and that's just the truth of the matter. So embrace that. Don't feel bad because your child's not having fun while learning to read. There are other fun things you can do on the sidelines, but again, to true mastery, just be okay with being consistent, with teaching for really short lessons and being super repetitive. It will get you where you want to go, and that's it. That's what I've learned as well. You can't be fun and teach to read. Not really. I wanted to share as well what I use to teach to read. So I use the McGuffey set. I think it's McGuffey. It has a whole box set, so it will take you from like primer right through to a very established reader. And for me, it's the set that I use. I really like it. I think it's very comprehensive. It's a really great set because it gave me the grounding and the starting points and the step-by-step process on how to confidently teach my child to read. All the mistakes I made didn't actually have anything to do with the curriculum. They had things to do with, you know, how consistent I was and all that kind of stuff. So I have links to those curriculums and box sets below. I think they're great, but they're not for everyone. They do have a biblical worldview through the stories, so if that's not for you, then I think you can also use the Good and the Beautiful. You can also use the Learning to Read in 100 Lessons. And there are so many other learning to read curriculums and programs out there. For me, the 4 stages that I'm going to take you through today are really quite foundational in any reading program, and they're actually things that you can do on your own. I have completely free flashcards and word lists and blend lists that you can use if you want to just try it for free, if you want to try and introduce it to your child before you have to spend any money, or if you're just trying to help them. If you have a child who's at school and they're struggling to read, then you can download and print those off, and you can use them as a secondary teaching system if you want. If you want to hear more about homeschooling and my journey in homeschooling and what I've learned and how I do it as a second-generation homeschooler, then please subscribe. I do a video once a week on either homeschooling, motherhood, or child training, and I thought I would try and get this video up as soon as possible because I am currently 38 weeks pregnant, and so I know I'll be taking a break once I have my new baby, and so I think I was hoping to just give you one more hopefully helpful video before I go for a little while. And so until next time, I'm Sinead. My blog is thesimplemama.com, where again I talk about child training, motherhood, homeschooling, all those things. So until next time, bye.